All right, welcome into the Autzen Audibles post-game edition reaction show. I'm at Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack. I think we walked out of Autzen watching for sure one of the best games ever played there in recent memory, maybe the best game ever played there. For sure, a victory for Oregon, 32-31. A thrilling outcome, a game, as Dan Lanning described it, just jab, 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 jab all game long, and then hit the occasional haymaker. The Ducks certainly landed plenty, but so did Ohio State. I think regardless, guys, of obviously Oregon won, that skews the impact here a little bit, but regardless of who won, this was an absolutely fantastic game that had all the hype for all
Mhm.
offseason,
Mhm.
all first 5 weeks of the year. Everything was geared towards this one, and it not only it met the expectations of the hype, but it exceeded it. These are two of the best teams in the country, two of the best teams in the Big Ten. Oregon walks out with a 1-point victory, and quite honestly, we now look at a team that you don't want to think too far down the road, but everything is before them, and everything now feels very real. They will be favorites moving the rest of the way. This Oregon team showed a lot in its development, its process, whatever you want to call it. They're legit, they're for real, and they could be a team that has a case for the number one ranking next week.
Yeah, this was a great football game. Just regardless of what the outcome could have been, regardless of the outcome was, it was everything that encapsulates what college football is all about. This was just a tremendous game, and it lived up to the billing. I was a little worried, like pregame. It's like, what if this game isn't good? Like, what if one team
Yeah.
just blows the other team out of the water? Like, and then you're like, in the third quarter, you're like, all right, well, this game's over. But that was absolutely not it. Spent the last 6 or 7 minutes of the game on the field, and it was just awesome. When Ohio State was driving towards the end of the game, they had the decibel reader up on the screen. It was hitting like 125, and it was very easily the loudest I've ever seen Autzen. It was in many ways, but a lot of it, just like the pure noise volume, was very similar to being on the field at Washington last year, and just how loud it was. And I don't know how you do anything in those circumstances, just on how loud it is, but unbelievable game. I don't really know where to start, other than I think just kind of going off of what Matt finished with is like, Oregon's in the driver's seat, and we hadn't necessarily seen them play to the point where a lot of people picked them to be a national champion going into the year, or go in
Right.
the Final Four in the college football playoffs. Like, we hadn't really seen that necessarily, because they hadn't really played like the best opponents, and obviously got off to the slow start. Look, we saw it today, and I don't even think they played their A+ game. Like, this was a
Yeah.
good, very solid A game. They did a lot of things right, and they also had a lot of things that didn't really go so well during the first half. And you're just kind of sitting there like, oh boy, like, what if they just, I don't know, put it all together or something like that? And like, what is this team? What could it look like in December when the going gets tough, and there's college football playoff games, there's a potential Big Ten championship game? Like, this team still has like a lot of room to grow. And I think that's really encouraging. And if you're Oregon and you're Dan Lanning, and you can see that, and I think for a lot of teams across the country, that could be pretty scary, that this team still has a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, that was like my number one thing walking out was, well, I guess was this the best win Oregon's had in a regular season ever? And I think
Yeah.
there's a strong case for that. We can get into
Yeah.
that if we want. But your point is the same one I had, which is, we talked about it. I know I said it and thought this all week. Like, Oregon had to play pretty much flawlessly to win this game, and I thought that was possible. I picked them to win by 3. They didn't play a very clean game. They left points on the board. They had issues with their field goal. They had issues with the PAT. They had some moments that were just where things didn't go right. They had a couple of snap issues in this game. They had some penalties that will let a player spit on another player, get ejected, and potentially take away. I mean, if that doesn't take place, that's probably going to end in a touchdown. Instead, it ends in a field goal. So there's all of these kind of moments throughout it where you go, well, this isn't clean football. These are kind of some of the moments that had bit them against Boise State, or earlier on in the season, when the narrative was kind of, is this team actually good? And I'm here to tell you, this team's actually quite good. And I think what I came away realizing is maybe the floor is a little bit higher than I had thought for this team, because neither team played their best, and yet Oregon was obviously right there throwing haymakers to the end and landing them. And huge credit to this defense for being faced with the game on the line, everything on their shoulders. I think a lot of people in the stands probably felt, okay, well, did we score a little too quick? A minute 47, I think, left.
Yeah.
They come down and kick a field goal, the game's over. And yet the defense, even after Ohio State got into field goal range, there's that offensive pass interference penalty that will go down as a huge part of this outcome. And yet the defense kept fighting. They fought all the way through the end, and ultimately it paid off. So, I mean, we can get into offense, defense, all the specifics. There were certainly a lot of, as Jared said, a lot of places we could go. But I think if you're an Oregon fan, you come out of this going, we didn't even play our best game, and we beat Ohio State. And we now have 6 more games in the regular season, all against lesser competition. There's not a team they'll play the rest of the way, even close to as good as the team they just beat. And now it's about just improving. Obviously, it's about winning those games and not having a slip up, but it's about proving you can play your A-plus game, putting it all together for 4 quarters. Because as crazy as it sounds, I don't know what you would grade that game. I'd probably still give it an A just because you beat Ohio State at home. But it was certainly not a flawless effort, and there were certainly a lot of things that Dan and the guys can go to work on this week.
There were a lot of mistakes, but I think we talked about this on our Thursday show, and we were all kind of in agreement, like, who was going to be the team that would, like, flinch first when adversity hit. Mm-hmm. And it was Ohio State time and time again. They had a drive. Granted, one of them was on the 4th down punt, but they had a drive where they had 3 delay of game penalties called on their offense, or false start penalties, one of the 2. The atmosphere 100% impacted Ohio State in this game. And I think you can argue, like, the Autzen crowd was probably worth a point or 2 in this outcome. You could talk about the offensive pass interference. It was Oregon's by Jeremiah Smith, or you could talk about, I think it was Denzel Burke, who got absolutely burned horrifically and had to grab Kenyon Sadiq so he wouldn't catch the ball for a touchdown. They made more of the mistakes for lack of execution or lack of preparation, if you will, than Oregon did. I think this is a monumental game for, obviously, the season and for Oregon football and for the recruits that were here and their goals for a championship. But it was also a moment for Dan Lanning and this coaching staff who, in previous games like this, the 2 against Washington last year, the 1 against Washington the year before, where coaching decisions kind of didn't play out correctly and it cost them games, Oregon looked like the better team today. They were the more prepared team today, and they did it. We talked about Trayshawn Holden getting ejected, and their best player defensively going into this game, based off of last week, Jordan Birch, who there was a ton of expectations he was going to have a huge game. He couldn't play because of his own injury, and yet they knock it off. I think you walk away from this, I'm at least, really impressed with Oregon's team, their toughness, their mental capacity to get through a game like this, but also the staff that we've been waiting for a breakthrough moment, and this is it.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know if Oregon kicks a field goal at the end of the game last year. I think they might have gone for it on 4th and 1 from whatever it was, the 1 or the 2. Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think on that? Because I
thought about it. Like it was kind of like, oh my God, will they actually kick this?
It crossed my mind, but I was thinking, if they don't get this and they lose the game, being on the 1 yard line when a field goal would put it ahead, there would have been a storming of the field for another reason after that game.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what happened.
That's what Dan said.
Yeah, and then but they came to the conclusion, like, we didn't score on third and goal from the 2 yard line. Like, we're going to kick the field goal. We're going to take the points. And that's what's got them into trouble the last couple of years, very specifically against Washington last year in Seattle. And so, yeah, it was certainly a learning moment. And just give a lot of credit to Dan, because I predicted Ohio State to win regardless, even if Birch was playing. And the fact that he wasn't playing and they were still able to limit the run, more or less limit the run. I know that Travion Henderson had that big 53-yard gain, but Quinshon Judkins was 11 for 23. Like, he didn't do anything. Obviously, he had the touchdown run, but that was from a yard away. So I would hope he would get that. But they did a really good job on that defensive line. And I know that they didn't get to the quarterback a lot. And I think that's where they missed Birch the most in terms of just disrupting Will Howard. However, on the run game, they were still good. It was a little shaky at the very beginning, but they figured it out. They really didn't rotate too often on the defensive line, at least from what I saw. And I give them a lot of credit. And Dan went into the game talking about how they had to pick their spots kind of with attacking and applying pressure up the middle with linebackers. And they didn't do it a lot, and it was okay because Dan talked about it at the end of the game. Like, their game plan was like, we're not going to let you go over the top on us. And they didn't. They had that one big shot to Jeremiah Smith where Jabbar Muhammad, if he turned his head around just in time, and then it's just Jeremiah Smith being a really good receiver making the catch. But they kept everything in front, and I think that kind of limited on what Ohio State could do. And overall, like the stats aren't going to look good because they gave up 467 total yards of offense. But that's an Ohio State team that is averaging, I think it's 44, 45 points a game. They're winning every game this season by almost 40 points. Like, that's an elite offense that they held to 31 points, just 10 second half points, same as Oregon. Like, it was a really good showing from them, even though they were without arguably their best defensive player in Birch.
Back to the Dan in-game thing, I kind of was struck of like, it was actually kind of similar in terms of the aggression to last year. Like, some people want to say like, oh, did he learn his lessons? He kind of didn't, like, right? Because they got stopped on 4th down right near the goal line. I think was that in the second quarter. They also had an onside kick in this game to get a free possession. Like, these are the kind of things that he had done in the past. So I feel like, in terms of coaching aggression, he's kind of doubled down to a certain degree. And obviously I'm happy he chose to kick a field goal at the end there, because I think that would have actually been probably against the basic strategy of what you should do there. But I will also say, like, I turned to Matt when it was a minute 47 left, and we both kind of said, this is going to be really tough for this defense to hold up. And it really didn't look like it was going to until the OPI. You want to get into some of the individuals here, because we talked about kind of what this game means and everything, but I thought Dylan Gabriel played an awesome game. Like, this was a Heisman quarterback caliber of performance. He missed Tez on, I mentioned that fourth down that they went for kind of near the goal line.
Yeah.
He had Tez really open there. There are a couple other moments where it's kind of like, did he make the right choice? But I love that I love that the offensive line gave him time to hit some of those long passes. I thought the offensive line played really, really well in this game.
0 sacks.
0 sacks for the 4th straight. Very few plays where they were just stacked up in the run game. And, obviously he wasn't sacked, but on the plays downfield, he had a lot of time, and he put some really, really good touch on some throws there. Obviously the ones to Evan, the one to Tez, like, those were just absolute dimes down the field with great touch and great ball placement, and credit to the guys for making the plays and finishing them. The touchdown to Evan in the back of the end zone is probably one of the better. I guess Bo was pretty good at that too.
That was a great throw, but an even better catch.
Yeah, it was great. It was just a great combination. It was, in general, great to see Evan involved the way he was. And in general, they really kind of targeted 3 guys. I think 26 of the 34 pass attempts went to either Tez, Evan, or Terrence Ferguson. That's probably the right 3 guys to get involved here. I'm sure Trayshawn Holden would have been more involved if he hadn't spat on a guy, which is I don't know. I don't even know what else to say about that. It's just like frustrating, disappointing. If you're an Oregon fan, you're going like, wow, he's out of the game. Now Justice Lowe has to play the whole rest of the game. So, but yeah, back to Dylan. I just thought he played great. And this is what you needed to see in a moment like this, right? Last couple of weeks, there's some issues. This game, cool as a cucumber, made the plays when needed, led a couple of drives that were obviously pivotal to the final result.
I mean, I've been critical of like the fit, but I've never really doubted the talent. And there's people, though, that are fans, whether on our message board or on Twitter or what have you, that doubt the talent. And I hope that this game eliminates that discussion, because he is a elite quarterback. And you brought up like a Heisman caliber game. I agree with you. Like, the Heisman is not won in the month of September. It's all about just staying in the sphere a little bit and staying in the discussion. And that is what he has done. And now he has the best win of anyone in the country. and he played tremendous. And his deep ball to Tez Johnson just before half was a thing of beauty. His deep ball to Evan Stewart was a thing of beauty. That juke he did on the RPO to score the touchdown. I mean, that's twice now that he's had some really dang impressive touchdown runs. He is playing at an all-time level. And I think something that he said today really resonated about like the confidence in the team and the slow start. And it's like he said, we're starting to figure things out and we're starting to gel together and play complementary football. And I think that is the scary thing is you can see it. Like Trayshawn Holden, when he got ejected, it was, oh boy, this is a big loss. And I think it speaks to the volume of the talent they have on this team. It was like he wasn't even missed. And the downfield blocking was good. The pass catching was good. Dylan Gabriel never got off schedule. And you're right. Like this was a Heisman caliber moment for him. It certainly didn't win it for him, but I think it should remind everybody that he is still and should be considered one of the favorites to win the award.
Yeah, Dylan was sick tonight. He was awesome. He had, like both of you guys mentioned, the deep throws. What impressed me most about those deep throws is they were to the right side of the field.
Yes.
And for a left-handed quarterback, it's just harder. You're throwing across your body, quote unquote. And normally he looks to the left side of the field for those deep throws. I think he hit Evan Stewart like against Boise State on those to the left side of the field. He hit Tez Johnson against UCLA on the left side of the field. Like that's usually his go-to because he's a lefty. Fun fact. But those were beautifully thrown balls, both of them. And the one to Evan Stewart in the end zone as well, like Matt pointed out, it was a hell of a throw and a hell of a catch. It was what you envisioned when Evan Stewart announced that he was coming to Oregon. Like these are the games, this game and the Boise State game. Hilarious person, by the way. Evan Stewart is just like a very, very naturally funny guy. So it's a shame we don't get to hear him or we don't get to interview him as often because he's just so dang funny.
Do you think he's in on all the jokes? Because I think sometimes he says stuff that's kind of outrageous that we think are funny that he doesn't realize is funny. But I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think
that's what makes him funny.
Yeah, okay. He's like Anthony Edwards. He's just like he can say a lot of things and just like naturally funny. But like the offense was really clicking. I know that the third quarter wasn't great with the fourth down that didn't go, even though the play was designed for Tez and Dylan just missed him. Like that stuff happens, but that's kind of like what we're overall kind of talking about is the level of offensive and overall success that they can still get to and achieve. Again, like if Dylan finds him on fourth down, like that's another 7 points, and they might go for 2 to try to get it to a real 1-score game rather than like a 5 or 6 point lead like it was for most of the night. So it was really impressive to watch Gabriel because, like Matt said, it hasn't always been pretty at points with the offense and with Dylan Gabriel's performance, like the 3 red zone interceptions the last 2 games. But man, he was just awesome tonight. At the very end of the game, he was just awesome. And without him, Oregon obviously doesn't come close to winning this game. He was just electric against a defense that coming into the game was one of the best in the country by nearly every statistical measure, one of the best in the country. And that just didn't matter. They just put up almost 500 yards of offense, like 4 yards away, 496 total. So just awesome. Again, awesome game. Just so much fun.
Last stat on the offense, and we should probably talk Jordan James as well. But I was just going to say, and I know Matt tried to ask Dan about it. There was some telephone, the wires got crossed. But the stat that we talked about coming in was Ohio State hadn't allowed a pass of 30 yards or more, and I think Oregon had 3 or 4 in this game.
They had 4 in this game, 3 in the first half.
Yeah, and so that was another thing that was crucial here was they were able to take the top off the defense, unlike anybody had done all season. And the especially impressive part is a couple of those went right at Denzel Burke, who is Ohio State's top corner and considered to be a really high draft pick, a guy that you'll hear on Sunday for sure going forward. So wanted to kind of throw that stat out just to kind of wrap up the pass offense thing. Jordan James, I thought was great once again, and also credit to the offensive line. I know there were some sequences where they maybe didn't get enough push to pick up a couple of first downs, or obviously at the end of the game there to punch it in rather than had to settle for the field goal. that's against an incredibly talented Ohio State front, and you're not going to win every single battle there. And the fact that you won enough to win this game and enough for Jordan James to, let me get the final stats here, 115 yards on the ground, and Oregon outran and outgained Ohio State on the ground here. That was another part that was really crucial. And to the point that I think Matt was also trying to get to with Dan, I think you can credit some of the vertical passing game for changing a little bit of what Ohio State was doing out there defensively to create some of those big runs. But the offense had both parts going, right? The pass game was really, really good, as we talked about. And I thought the run game with Jordan James was, for, I don't know what it is, basically 6 consecutive weeks with him specifically, very impactful whenever he touched the football. Had a couple of long gains that kind of created some momentum. So, this offense is now firing on all cylinders. And frankly, if you were to grade the position groups, there's probably not a single one where you'd give a low grade, because it wasn't like there were a lot of drop passes. I thought the tight ends.
Outside of Terrence Ferguson.
Ferg sometimes. Anyway, but my point is, like, there was a lot of positivity in this offense, and it wasn't just like one group and everybody else was kind of up and down. I thought just collectively the offense was really good.
Yeah, it was a peak performance. Defensively, I think this is where we walk away really impressed. I mean, obviously we're really impressed with everything, but lose Jordan Birch during the week. Dan Lanning really didn't get into much details other than, like, it sounds like he could be out for a bit. They said that he's going to hold him out for the benefit of the player, and there was a chance maybe he could play, but he didn't even dress down. And nonetheless, like, you don't want to say like his absence wasn't felt, but Oregon did a really good job of next man up. And you hear that, next man up. And you're like, yeah, but the guy you just lost is a freaking NFL player, and the guy behind him is not. And that's going to be really hard to replace. And tonight, at least, they did. Mateo was really good. Tatum Tuioti was really good. Marion Winston got in a little bit more and was good. And then, the usual suspects that you needed to step up. Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon were absolutely fantastic. Derek Harmon had one of the more impressive forced fumbles that I don't even really want to call it a fumble. He just straight up stole the football from the Ohio State running back. Can't remember who it was, but really impressive performance by that front seven. What Oregon was able to do with the Ohio State run game, that seemed to be like the focus. Like Lanning talked about, we did not want them to run the football. The last 6 losses that they really struggled to run. And you look at Ohio State's run game, and Henderson had 87 yards, but 53 of that was on one play. Yeah. And then Judkins was just nothing. I mean, he had a touchdown, but 11 carries, 23 yards, like, he couldn't do a thing. And you're really impressed. And that was a question going into the Big Ten. Like, could Oregon front seven, could they hold up against the grind of what the Big Ten is? And its first real true test, I thought they excelled.
Who stood out? I was just going to ask Jared, who stood out to you most, just like watching the game live? Because there's a ton of names you could list. I'm just curious, as the resident defense guy.
Yeah, a lot of names. I think it was mostly Mateo off the edge. When Oregon was able to get pressure, it was a lot of Mateo, and then Harmon up the middle. I thought the linebacking group was pretty good. I thought Ohio State actually did a good job a lot of the times where if they started to get a rhythm on offense, they would never sub, so that they would just keep whatever personnel Oregon had in. So it was really smart by them and Ryan Day and Chip Kelly. But I thought the open field tackling was really impressive. So that kind of just encapsulates all of the secondary more or less, just because there weren't a lot of there were some bigger plays for Ohio State where they would throw the ball down the field some, but there weren't a lot of quick 6-yard route that turns into 25, 30 because of missed tackles or poor execution on the defensive side of the ball. Like, there's going to be some mess ups in a game. It's football. It's really hard to be perfect, but I thought open field tackling was really good, and that's why Taishim and Kobe led the team with 8 tackles each. Like, they were everywhere. They tried to keep everything in front of them, and I think that they did a good job of that. But interior defensive line, like Matt mentioned with Harmon and Caldwell, their stats aren't going to pop. They very rarely will, but they did a good job controlling the interior. Ohio State really didn't try to go too often up the A gap in runs. They kind of went out towards the side and outside zones, and that worked for a little bit. But those two guys are monsters on the interior. And just for Oregon to have this type of game without Birch and against one of the nation's best offenses with future NFL, probably first-round receivers and Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith, like they got theirs. They're always going to get theirs, but they didn't really, they didn't have the 65-yard touchdown. They both only had one. It's going to happen. They're that good. They're playing at the college level. Like I thought Nico and Dante and Jabbar Muhammad did like the best they could do, and they kept them in front of them for more often than not. I just thought it was a really sound defensive game, and they did the best that they could against an offense that's going to do really, really well against basically everybody this year.
Yeah, I'm happy you highlighted the corners because the stats aren't gonna. You're not thrilled when you look at it and you see between Smith and Egbuka they caught 19 passes for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like that's a pretty good amount of production. But to your point, also both of them I think combined averaged like 10 yards per catch. Like that is doable. I remember when Oregon played USC in I think it was 2019 down there, and they had Amon-Ra, they had Michael Pittman was on that team. Tyler Vaughn, so he had a young Drake London was on that team. All these guys, and those guys all finished with like 70, 80 yards, I think, as I recall. But like the yards per catch was like 10 or below for every one of them. And you were kind of like, okay, well, they were involved a lot, but it wasn't like they had a ton of explosives. And both Smith and Egbuka certainly had a couple where they got lost downfield or made plays further down the field. But I thought in general, like there weren't huge coverage busts. I think the closest thing to one seemed to be, I'd have to go watch the play, but the Egbuka touchdown, it did feel like he was running to open space. I don't know if that was just between the two zones or what, or if there was a miscommunication, but that was the only one where I could think like, oh, that was maybe not defended very well. But I just think in general, going against these guys, you have to lower your expectations in terms of like, you're not just going to shut these guys out. And I think collectively, Oregon secondary did a pretty damn good job here, especially when to the point that Matt made earlier about like losing Birch, that, well, that's a NFL guy down to Mateo, who's going to be an NFL guy, but not quite there yet. In this case, you're talking about like clear NFL top tier elite talent going against guys like, I think Jabbar will probably end up on a team and he'll get drafted at some point, but that's not a first round corner. And they were able to at least, I guess, minimize some of the big play ability for this pass game, which is, I'm sure, also a big part of the game plan going in, along with slowing that run game down.
You just touched on at the very end there, like Nico and Manning and Sheem, and like Jabbar gets so much of the credit, and deservedly so. Like he is by far their best secondary player, but this was a big step up game for all those other DBs. And I think it was Tez that even kind of talked about how like he was asked like a question about their receiving core, and he brought up how like, hey, like we need to talk more about our DBs. Like our guys heard about how good Ohio State was, and our guys showed up from a defensive back standpoint. Like maybe I don't know. Like I just think that this is a unit that's starting to round in the form, and like what you guys have said, like they didn't play clean, and yet they still won. And the potential for this team is really high. Like, go back to what Erik said at the very beginning. Like the floor is probably a lot higher than what we gave them credit for, and now it turns into like a short week. They go to Purdue on the road. It's going to be a trip. I'm excited to hear from Jared of just like the process of getting to West Lafayette, because it's like freaking Pullman.
Oh yeah, let's go. It's not too bad. It's not Pullman. It's not Pullman.
It's not Pullman.
You report back on Saturday and tell us if it's Pullman or not.
Yeah.
Oh, I can do that. That's fine.
But like everything is before them now, and this is where the true test comes. Like, do they rest on their laurels, or as Lanning put it, like I'm excited to watch the tape, see where we can get even better. Like this is what makes this is what's going to make this team interesting to watch now. Because you said it earlier, Erik, like they have 6 games, they should win all 6. This was the game that's been circled, that's been talked about, that's been analyzed and hyped up. Now what's the response? I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to come out and they're going to just smash Purdue. But it's easier said than done.
Yeah, always easier said than done. And that's been the thing about Dan Lanning and his time at Oregon, is that the team doesn't really look past whoever they're going to play. Like we talked about it kind of last week, where we all had Ohio State circled on the schedule, but they had to go play Michigan State, who is kind of frisky. Like they had, old Jonathan Smith is there. Like there's some names that we remember. Like, and they didn't look past that at all. Like, was it the prettiest game? Not really, but that wasn't a close game. Like they blew Michigan State out of the water. And it was very clear. It's like, all right, like we all know Ohio State's coming. They did not look past Michigan State at all. And basically every guy who talked tonight after the game was like, yeah, we're going to celebrate this one, but it's, back to the glue factory later, like tomorrow. Like we're all going to go back and watch tape and go look at whatever we need to do to improve and what we did well. So I think they're going to be ready for the short week, the travel to Purdue. I think that'll be interesting just to see how that all goes about. But I would be surprised if they weren't just prepared for Purdue and anybody else for the rest of the season.
Just my last thought, and I know we're going to wrap because it's almost midnight here, but I just, in terms of my confidence level in them taking care of business, last year they won their first 5 games, lost a 3-point heartbreaker in Seattle to Washington, and they won the subsequent 6 games by, I'm not even going to try to do the math here, but it's got to be 30 plus points per game in terms of the winning margin. The USC game was 9 points, but as we remember that, I think that was 23 in the fourth quarter. But my point remains, like a year ago, they kind of found themselves in a similar spot. Obviously they lost the marquee game as opposed to winning it, but where, the schedule really got easier. It was Washington State, Utah, Cal, USC, Arizona State, Oregon State. That was the final 6. This year's schedule, I think, is probably comparable to that in terms of the caliber of opponent. And now we see if they're able to do what they did last year. But I just wanted to point that out. We've seen this now under Dan Lanning, the games you're supposed to win and win convincingly, the track record's pretty good there. And we'll see if they're able to do it this year. But just kind of going into this stretch run now, obviously totally different field of teams. The only repeat opponent will be Washington right at the end. But you have to at least like the track record of what they've done in the past when facing kind of a set of the season where they were favored heavily in every single game. They went out, and I think they covered the spread in most of those games.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, because I think Erik mentioned it at the beginning of the show. It's already on the site. We talked about it on the podcast. We talked about it on a mailbag question too, where this game ranks now. Going in, this was a hot topic. On the fly, quick reaction to it. Games that always resonate with me, like 2009 Fright Night against USC. Maybe the loudest Autzen had been prior to today. Obviously the Washington game in 2018. I even think like the War for the Roses in 2009 in December was pretty loud and pretty wild. But Autzen was special tonight. Record crowd from a stadium perspective. They didn't beat the state of Oregon record from a sporting event attendance crowd, but 60,000 and like 100 something at this game. Wild number to think about. It was different and it was loud. It was. I mean, they had fireworks going off going into the
pulled out all the stops.
Like I tweeted it like, or no one at Oregon can come out after this and say like this game was just the next biggest game on the schedule because it was the next one. Like this meant more to the school, and very rarely do we see these games live up and exceed the hype, and this one did. And I think it's gonna, it's impacted because they won, but I think it's gonna go down probably as the best environment I've been at in my life at Autzen Stadium. It's not the best win, but environment standpoint, like it's gonna be tough to beat.
What would you say the best win is? I'm just curious because
Florida State in the Rose Bowl, the way that game played out.
Best regular season win though, maybe.
This one, it's either this one or the other Ohio State one in 2021.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm not as well versed in Oregon lore as you guys are, but for me, during my time, I don't know, being an Oregon fan, then a student, now a reporter, definitely the best atmosphere I've seen in Autzen. A sneaky weird one in my memory is a terrible game, but it was 2016 in Oregon, Washington. Like the pre-game, it vibes inside of Autzen was really good. And maybe that was just me being a dumb student and like I've never experienced something like that before. But the student section was 95% full, like an hour to kick. Like they were rocking the whole time. There were a good amount of Ohio State fans, which always makes it fun. It's like when BYU traveled here a couple of years ago, where it's just like everybody's intense. It's always like a rah-rah moment. There's always a crowd cheering no matter what. But for me, like being on the field and everything else, like I thought this was peak Autzen Stadium. I don't know how it really gets much better than this. And again, in my tenure as like encompassing Oregon, I think that's the most impressive win I've seen, at least at Autzen, and probably overall. Like I think the win at Ohio State certainly holds like a really high spot on this metaphorical list, but it doesn't seem like it gets much better than this one.
Yeah, in terms of the atmosphere, I had one of the Ohio State 24/7 guys, actually Patrick Murphy, who was on our podcast this week, tell me he thought that was the loudest football stadium he's been in. And that includes the Big House. That includes, obviously, games at Penn State and other Big Ten venues. I thought that was just kind of like something I wanted to share on the podcast of like, it wasn't just the three of us guys who've been at Autzen seeing hundreds of games, combined probably or whatever, that felt this was a really special, environment. I think it was felt by a lot of visiting media. I sat and talked to a lot of national media kind of in my row. And they were all really impressed with the atmosphere. And you also know it's a big game when they press food. They try a little harder. We had,
yeah, of course.
We tried doing some ribs and some potato salad and beans. And I think we got like 80% of where we needed to go, but they did roll out all the stops, even up in the box for those of us who were not on the roof.
To your point, Eric, about what Patrick said, I have checked Ohio State's message board, and there has been a couple posts of like people that were at the game going and saying by far like the legit home field advantage, loudest stadium. So like, yeah, I think this was a game from an on-field perspective of showcasing what Oregon is, but this was also a welcome to the Big Ten moment for the rest of the conference to what Oregon is from a game day atmosphere. It's not that little school from the Pac-12. It's a pretty big juggernaut. But that's going to do it for us here on this Autzen Audibles podcast post-game edition. We'll have more stuff up on the site on duckterritory.com recapping the win and the signature win that it is and where it means and what comes next for the Ducks. Plus, we're going to dive into real quick here the Purdue game, getting ready for the Friday night tilt in West Lafayette against the Purdue Boilermakers. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.